Our club's always been a forum for visionaries, public figures, and decision makers to command attention to the issues of our time and inform the most relevant, compelling, and challenging conversations. Here we offer first-person access to dynamic political, business, and public personality.
The Canadian Club is one of the most important podiums anywhere in the world that a Canadian can speak to, tell Canadians what it is that they think, develop those thoughts. And so I want to thank you for that very, very much.
Please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists today.
Through our programs and events, including our youth and young leaders programs, our diversity partnerships, our joint events, and our media and social media opportunities, we offer you access to dynamic political, social, and business figures from abroad and right here at home.
The platform from which the eloquence of Canada has flowed all of that time, whether it be business, education, politics, sports, arts, and culture. If someone wants to say something to Canadians about this country and about the future of this country, this is the venue you choose.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are ready to get back underway. And a special welcome to those of you joining us online at canadianclub.org. Thank you for spending a bit of your afternoon with us. My name is Glenn Parkinson, host for this afternoon and Canadian Club Toronto president. Today we extend our gratitude to PwC and Tories for hosting and sponsoring and making today's event possible. So thank you, PwC and Tories. We'd also like to thank EY, our streaming sponsor, which allows us to broadcast and make this talk free of charge and available online. So thank you, EY. Thank you to our season sponsor, Canadian Bankers Association, Air Canada, our airline partner, and our partnership with Canada's Forest Trust allows us to be carbon neutral for the entire season as they plant and maintain a forest in our honor. So thank you to all of our sponsors for making today possible. Now, before we get underway, one event that was just announced this morning, and I feel it's apropos that I'll mention, is on May 30th, we have an employer-sponsored healthcare or employer-funded healthcare event. It'll take place right here, and it features, among others, the CEO of Sagard portfolio company dialogue. So watch for that on canadianclub.org. Now, many of you have been with us before, and you know that we encourage questions and participation from the audience. So you'll see in the center of your table a question card. Please be liberal with your questions, hold them up, and we will bring them up into the discussion. And for those of you online, you'll see a button on the right-hand side of your screen. It says click to submit question. So please do so, and we will also be able to get those questions into the discussion. Now, I am pleased to invite Joseph Lowe, partner at Sagard, to introduce our speaker for today. Joe?
Thank you so much, Glenn. Members and guests, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce to you today our guest speaker. Paul Desmarais III is the chairman and CEO of Sagard, an alternative asset management firm that is active in equities, credit, and real estate. During his 8-year leadership of Sagard, Paul is focused on partnering with entrepreneurs to transform investment strategy and their impact on their communities. Today, Sagard has an AUM of more than $25 billion and capabilities in Canada, United States, Europe, and the Middle East. Paul leads the growth strategy for Sagard and serves as executive chairman and co-founder of Portage, Sagard's fintech and financial services investment strategy. He's also the chair and co-founder of Diagram, a leading venture builder. Within Sagard's investment portfolios, he chairs Wealthsimple, Novisto, and Greyhawk, and is a director of Nesto and of Midas. Paul is also a board member of Empower, the second largest 401k provider in the United States. Paul is dedicated to the community, and to building a better business world. He is co-founder of the Black Wealth Club and the Indigenous Leadership Circle. Prior to his current role, Paul worked at Goldman Sachs, Imerys SA, and Great West Life Co. Moderating our conversation today is Tanya van Biesen, President and CEO, Women in Capital Markets, and President-elect of Canadian Club Toronto. Prior to joining WCM, Tanya led the Canadian board and CEO practice at a global human capital firm. And previously, she headed member engagement and operations at Catalyze, a global nonprofit focused on the advancement of women and other underrepresented groups in the workplace. Paul, Tanya, it is my pleasure to present you the Canadian Club Toronto podium.
Very well done.
Don't drink his water or my water. Good afternoon, everybody. Paul,
Thank you.
you're taller than I thought you would be. So just before you saw chairs here, but then Paul said, let's stand, which is interesting because I had to think today about wearing pants. So now I didn't actually need to wear pants, but delighted to have you here today. Thank you. Let's start with your personal journey. I think we'd all like to understand a little bit about kind of how you got to be here, what led you to be an asset management guy and to Sagard.
So Joseph walked through parts of my CV, so I don't need to repeat that. But I think, foundational to who I am are very much the kind of values that we grew up with as a family. And I think it really led to our path today. And so if you think of those values, they were hard work, continuous learning, and basically humility. If you think about hard work, ultimately, especially when you grow up as a third generation, it's very easy to rest on your laurels. But from a very early age, my parents had us working continuously. So when I was 9, I worked in my mom's photography store. I'd clean the store every day after work. When I was a teenager, my father really believed in manual labor. And so I worked as a rancher, actually on the Mannix Ranch out in Alberta. And I'd build barbed wire fences all day. My hands would bleed every single day. And then after that, I worked as a factory worker in France, in the south of France, in a terracotta roof tile factory. And so I'd spend my time stacking the tiles and then taking them out and cleaning the natural gas jets. And so it's 120 degrees in these factories in the south of France. It's really kind of tough working conditions. And it was interesting because as part of that job, you as a person on the roof tile production chain, you have to hit every roof tile with a stick. And based on the sound, it tells you whether the roof tile is good or not. And when I applied for my first job in finance at Goldman Sachs, the interviewers were like, Paul, we look at your CV, you've been a rancher, you've been a factory worker, you worked in a store. There is nothing here that tells us you'll be any good at finance. And I said, look, you're wrong. As a roof tile production maker, I did this all day, and now all I need to do is this. And you know what?
You got the job.
It was, they thought that was really funny. And then in terms of continuous learning, I think to build anything today, you have to be a voracious reader because the world's moving so quickly that, ingesting the stories of others that came before you to try and learn from what they've done is really important. And so that's played a big role in my life. And then humility, look, I always hate calling myself humble because I feel like that's, bad. But the reality is that I try and approach life and I try to approach everybody that I meet on an equal playing field. And I think that, I hope that everybody that's ever interacting with me feels that, I've been, pretty down to earth. And I think that's been really important for us. And those values are really key. And so what I'd leave you with is if you have kids, spend time on values early because I think that they will shape your children in the future and codify those values. And in the case of my parents, they've literally codified those values and we reaffirm them every time we have a family meeting. And I think those have formed the base of who I am today. And even for those of you who work at Sagard and for those who observe Sagard, you'll know that we really focus on our 5 values. And so it's been really important.
I'm just curious, any of those family values the same as the Sagard values?
So it's interesting because in many ways, hard work could be aligned with entrepreneurship. Yeah. There's nothing, you can't be an entrepreneur unless you work really hard. To be an entrepreneur, you also have to produce. And so I'd say those align well. Continuous learning and innovation is probably another one. And then I'd say, humility probably goes well with authenticity. Okay. And for those who don't know, our other two values are collaboration and rigor.
And I understand, because I had a little bird whispering in my ear, that each year someone gets recognized in alignment with one of those values.
Yes.
Is that right? Okay.
Yes.
So how does
we have something we call the River Rock Award.
Oh.
And at the Christmas parties of the different cities every year, we actually have a firm-wide nomination process where employees get to nominate who they believe embodied a specific value the best. And then we have a little trophy.
They get a rock?
They get, well, it's in the form of our logo, the kind of that we call the River Rock. And that's been, really great because it allows everybody in the firm to live those values. And one of the things I'm very proud of is I think we've got great alignment as a firm. And so, one of our objectives, for example, is to make over 500 introductions to our portfolio companies that will help them grow this year. And a member of our IT team heard this and was like, you know what, I'm gonna make one introduction. And literally our head of IT in Montreal found some company in the US he'd interacted with, introduced them to one of our portfolio companies in Europe, and sure enough, they signed the commercial contract. And so that kind of clarity of values and that clarity of objectives in our firm, I think helps us grow and develop in a great way.
Cool. FinTech. Let's pivot to FinTech. I know that would be of interest to this audience. So Portage has cultivated companies in this area. So talk to us a little bit about what you see going on in the FinTech world. Where does Canada play? Where are the opportunities? Obviously, you've got Wealthsimple that you can credit to that portfolio, but talk to us about what you envision for this country in FinTech.
So first and foremost, we have a few leaders of our FinTech strategy here. We have my co-founder Adam Fileski over there, and Ricky, who's one of our partners, and I didn't see anybody else, but they ultimately are the FinTech experts. But in terms of like some of the general themes that we're seeing, obviously AI is a big topic. Yeah. The how do you implement these new tools to make yourself more efficient is really interesting. And so can you imagine a world where through LLMs, customer service cost is zero? And what are the implications of what you could deliver for clients if all of a sudden the cost of serving them is zero? Obviously, there's huge efficiencies to be gained through AI in coding and in other parts of the business. But I think, one vision that inspires me is the vision of, what if customer service could cost nothing? And I think that would drive, gap. I think one of the things that's really interesting is I think in the 8 years of us kind of building Portage and making FinTech investments, I have the opportunity to sit on the board or observe strategy sessions of incumbents and also spend time with the disruptors. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting about AI is that I've never seen as big of a gap in the approach to AI as I do today. Large financial institutions, I think, are very hesitant to kind of adopt it broadly for good reasons. I think there's a lot of regulatory risks in adopting AI and black box models. I think that there's going to be a lot of questions as to how decisions are made, especially in financial services, if everybody just adopts AI quickly. But I've never seen as big of a gap between the behavior of the disruptors and the incumbents. And I think what's interesting is that it's in the question of like, will the disruptors get the clients faster, or will the incumbents figure out how to innovate faster? Yep. I think AI has actually increased the speed of the disruptors potentially getting clients. And I think it's also reduced the burn because all of a sudden they're able to do the same thing with less people, which I think favors the disruptors that have data in a good way. And so I think businesses like Wealthsimple are extremely well positioned in this environment. There are tons of other themes in FinTech that we're looking at, whether it be embedded financial services in different industries, or whether it be the need to basically rebuild the entire kind of back office of financial institutions. Because as many of you know who work in banks, a lot of the banks still work on old coding languages. Many companies are still working on mainframes. And a lot of that back office is going to have to be rebuilt. And I think, in the last 2 years, I think financial institutions have really started to embrace the fact that, what is core to what they thought was core to their business may not be core, and it's time to outsource. And so if you look at a deal that we did last year where Investors Group outsourced their entire mortgage operations to one of our portfolio companies, Nesto, and then Canada Life did the same. Those are two examples of things that I think 3-4 years ago, they never would have considered, because everybody was like, hey, we're going to do things in-house. But now, I've always said that, ultimately, if you try and serve everybody with everything, you're ultimately serving nobody. I think, we're in a world where understanding what are your core strengths as a business has never been more important, and get rid of everything else.
Open banking. This country has not exactly led the charge. So what's your view on when are we going to get there? Is the government moving too slowly? Talk about
Well,
that.
again, our open banking expert is right there, Ben Harrison, and he would be able to talk to you at length about this.
Okay. Ben, did you want to come up?
But I'd say in general, we've been very slow on the trigger in Canada, right? The UK moved years ago. Mm-hmm. Australia's moved years ago. The US, I think, has a naturally competitive landscape, so regulation and policy is less important, because I think that's a really competitive market in any case. I think, we're now moving, but, we still need to modernize our payment rails. There's still lots of limitations on who has access to payment rails. It's like we are very slow on the trigger, and that ultimately harms consumers. And I think, and what's interesting is that a lot of people think, open banking is going to lead to like more fragmentation and more competition. Not necessarily. If you look at open banking in the UK, Lloyds Bank has gained share, on a pretty regular basis since then. And so you're not necessarily going to see all of a sudden kind of RBC's, strength get threatened. What you will have is more consumer choice, more visibility for consumers, better tools. But you won't necessarily see a major change, I think, in the competitive landscape. You'll just see certain entrants be able to offer better products, but it's not going to lead, I think, to a world where we're going to have 15 banks in Canada. I think we will remain, a very concentrated financial services market for a very long time.
So are you having conversations with the feds about how to move this along, or?
That's been
that's back to
Ben's
Ben.
work. I stay out of this.
Okay.
I've long learned that every minute spent with politicians is probably not a good use of time.
You should have been here yesterday. Broadly, let's scope out to asset management. So you've got a whole bunch of strategies that you're responsible for. What's your view of asset management in this country? Where are the opportunities? Where are you guys picking up on themes? What's,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we are really excited about the 10 years ahead. Ultimately, I think, there are mega trends supporting the alternative asset management space. And I think there's two mega trends that are going to take place over the next few years. One is continued consolidation around the alternative space, and that's driven by the fact that large institutions want to kind of consolidate their relationships, but it's also driven by the fact that the cost of running firms like ours is just increasing, because the regulatory requirements are increasing, the compliance requirements are increasing, and so that cost to run a firm is just making it that like small players are going to have a really tough time surviving, on top of the fact that large institutions are going to, probably, be concentrating their relationship more and more. I think beyond consolidation, there's a really important trend that we are going to bet big on, which is the retailization of alternatives. And I think in Canada, the wealth markets have been very poorly served historically with the retail offerings in alts. And you've seen a lot of blow-ups in Canada in the last few years. And we hope that Sagard will be a leader in that space. And I hope that we'll be one of the top 5 firms in retail alts within the next 5 years. And so that is something we're betting big on. And we have a product shelf to do it. Because if you think about what is needed for great products for the retail channel or the high net worth channel, it's really important for them to be very diversified. And one of the problems that has happened in some of the products offered in the past where they were overly concentrated. And so if you look at the credit product that we launched on the Wealthsimple shelf in June, that's been an extraordinarily successful launch. I think we have 170 million of equity in that product already today, which would make it one of the most successful alternative product launches, I think, in Canadian history. And the goal is to then take that product and replicate it across many platforms. And that's a wonderful product because it mixes our private lending capabilities. It mixes our broadly syndicated loan capabilities, and soon we'll mix some of our CLO capabilities in a very diversified portfolio. And so the goal is to replicate that and then do the same in real estate and private equity. And so we acquired a firm, Performance Equity Management, specifically to be able to package those fund-to-fund capabilities and deliver that once again to retail savers, because ultimately our view is that whatever you do as a retail investor, it needs to be highly diversified. And in many cases, a fund-to-fund solution is the best way to deliver that. And so those are some of the kind of major kind of trends. I think one of the niche things about Sagard is that we're a mixture of a firm that could provide access to these broad asset classes, but we also offer a ton of specialty solutions. And so we could be great for people that are just kind of entering alts, but we could also be a great complement to existing alt portfolios.
Interesting. Let's talk geography. So you opened an office in Abu Dhabi.
Yes.
Talk to us about why the Middle East, why now? How does that figure in the overall strategy?
So it's really interesting because like I've always loved adventure, right? It goes back to the value of continuous learning, and I think I often tell people you have to go to know, and I did my first trip to the Middle East in 2019, and that was actually a trip for INSEAD, which is my alma mater, and INSEAD is a campus in Abu Dhabi. And originally they had invited directors of INSEAD, which my father was very involved. But my father was sick, and so as a result, he sent me instead. And I got to Abu Dhabi, and there were a few things that blew my mind. One is within 2 days, I'd met nearly every minister in the country, and all of them were effectively entrepreneurs. Like literally, they sat down with us and was like, this is my plan, these are my policies I'm thinking about, why is this not business friendly? And I thought, wow, there's a country that could learn from this. Not to name any, but and then even I met with the president, and the president had his granddaughter there, and we chatted, and he was just an incredibly humble man, and super focused on like, how do I drive my country in a single direction, with a very clear goal. And I thought, wow, like if we at Sagard can play a role in helping this country, which is in many ways a beacon of freedom and a beacon of actually like tolerance, because actually the year we were there was the year of tolerance in Abu Dhabi. And it's interesting because, Abu Dhabi's built this place called the Abrahamic House, which has a mosque, a synagogue, and a church together. And I think the synagogue is one of the most visited synagogues in the world by non-Jewish people in Abu Dhabi. And it was interesting because I even spoke to the head rabbi of Abu Dhabi, and he was like, look, I feel way safer here than in New York. And so these are all things that when you live in Canada, you don't quite realize what's happening over there. And then when you think about it economically, there's a basin of about 400 million people, if you add Turkey and Egypt, that are really young, that are really dynamic, with governments that are really focused on making it work. Because if it doesn't work, the consequences are dire. And so we as a firm are really excited about the region. We have an office in Abu Dhabi. We're hoping to hire more people there. We're bringing a lot of our portfolio companies to the region to open offices, because when you think about a set of financial institutions that need to rebuild everything, there's a lot of financial institutions there that are really looking to rebuild anything. And then I just joined the board of the Wealthsimple of Turkey, which is a whole new adventure called Midas. And so I'm really excited to be spending more time in Turkey as well.
All asset classes in Abu Dhabi, do you see them, like, are you going to try and play in all asset classes?
No, I'd say we're going to be much more focused on the commercial development of our portfolio there, because ultimately, like, if you're going to try and create outsized winners in venture, it's not yet developed enough of a market to create, I think, huge wins. But we're going to keep a close eye, and my guess is that we'll make selectively 1 or 2 investments in the region out of our main fund, and hopefully over time we do more and more and more, because I think it's a very exciting region. And when you have a leadership that knows exactly where they're going, it's incredible how much can get done.
Interesting. You said you made a comment that garnered some applause in the room, so let me just touch on that for a second. So Letco Brasso is advancing the notion that Canadian asset managers should be investing more in Canada.
Yeah.
Can you, I know that's really implicates the pension plans, but can you talk about your view of Canada versus all else?
Look, this is a debate, the Canadian pension plan debate. I'm going to stay far out of it. But I would say that if you look globally to countries where their airports are privately owned, you tend to have a much better service at those airports. And so there's something about private ownership of infrastructure that feels to me like a bit of a no-brainer, but somehow it doesn't happen. But for me, if you want the large pools of capital to invest in Canada, you need to make accessible large investment opportunities. And the reality is there's just not that many. And so as a result, privatization of infrastructure just feels like a pretty basic way to do it. Because it's very hard to say, hey, you got to invest X of your assets and then there not be any opportunity. Right. That'll really hurt all Canadians. And so that's the extent of which I'll kind of talk there. But in terms of investment in Canada in general, I'd say, look, we have way too many trade barriers between our provinces. Like for a tiny country, we are way too divided. One of my biggest pet peeves is kind of national unity and having these conversations happen. I mean, one of the fun projects that we did last year is we commissioned a play on the Canadian energy debate. And we had people that have strong views about, that carbon is bad. And we had people that come from the oil industry, basically have a boozy wine dinner together. And the play reenacts their debate. And it's actually really amazing because by taking a step back and observing, our fellow Canadians fight it out, you realize that, both sides may have, extreme opinions that are not productive. And the reality is that, it's probably our duty to the world to be exporting a lot more energy.
Interesting. I know. We're going to go for at least 3 rounds of applause, so let's see. Okay, from the audience, I appreciated the perspectives you shared on your upbringing. Your family has a long and quiet tradition of policy engagement in Canada. This is actually a perfect question based upon what you just said. Is this an area so your family has a long and quiet tradition of policy engagement in Canada. Is this an area of interest? And if so, can you share perspectives on the areas you feel Canada needs to address to position itself for continued prosperity?
So it is not an area of interest.
Hard no.
And look, there are people that are way better paid than I am to think about those types of issues. I mean, I think our success as a firm has been that we stay focused on our objectives and we execute on those objectives and we don't get distracted. Okay. And I view any form of politics or opining on politics or even geopolitical thought as a huge distraction. One of my great childhood heroes was David Rockefeller, which is a little weird to have David Rockefeller as a childhood hero, but it's okay. And I had the pleasure of having lunch with him. And I asked David, what do you think about peace in the Middle East? And David said, my young man, let me give you a piece of advice. Worry about what you could impact, and what you can impact will grow. And I have really stuck to that. And I try to stay really focused on what I can impact in my direct vicinity and what I could build and the jobs I can create and the wealth that we can create in our communities. And I try and not get distracted by anything around me.
Which makes you very capable of being a politician because you only answered the first half of the question. So what areas do you feel Canada needs to address to position itself for continued prosperity?
I'm not going to speak for Canada.
Oh, dang. Okay. Sorry, I tried, whoever. So you have a responsible investment policy at Sagard.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us about how that informs your investment decisions and how you guide the organization?
Yeah. So again, if you go back to our values, we spoke about entrepreneurship, hard work. We spoke about innovation. We spoke about authenticity. And ultimately, our approach to ESG has to be rooted in our authenticity. And so ultimately, we did not want to do anything that was just basically a check-the-box exercise. So everything we do around ESG has to be a virtuous circle into our business model. And so ultimately, we decided to really double down on diversity. And the way we doubled down on diversity is we basically said, look, there's something fundamentally flawed with the recruiting process, where when you ask, a recruiter, you were in the space, to be like, hey, give me 5 people that you might know for this role, they tend to quickly think about the people they already know. But by saying, hey, give me 5 people, but 2 of them have to be diverse, our experience is it forces them to do more work, and then all 5 candidates end up being higher quality. That's been kind of our experience. And the reality is that as a result of that, Sagard has, I think, just over 40% women and over 25% racialized people in our firm, which I'm really, really proud of. Then we said, okay, how do we access additional talent pools? And so that's where we decided to create the Black Wealth Club and the Indigenous Leadership Circle. These are mentorship groups where both people from the Black community and the Indigenous community get to apply. And if you get into the circle, the rule is you have unconditional access to my network. And so the only purpose of these groups is to accelerate their careers. Many of them actually work for all of your institutions. And they tend to be kind of people that are emerging leaders, but often come from communities where they felt very alone. Because as a person that grows up in a rural community that wants to have a career in finance, it's not obvious to have a set of peer groups. And so what's been fun about these groups is we've effectively created peer groups for these people of equally motivated people that have ambition and that all of a sudden have access to the whole Sagard network in order to fuel those ambitions. And so that is really exciting because then that fuels into our talent pipeline. And our goal is to really use that in order to fuel our growth as a firm by having diverse talent. So that's what we're doing on diversity, and I'm really excited about it. We also have diversity clauses in all of our term sheets where, basically within, I think, 6 months or 12 months, you need to add diverse members to your leadership team. And that's been really well received because we actually pair that with the playbook as to how these companies can then do that. Because if you just tell people add diversity and you don't give them any tools, you're not going to get very far. On the environmental side, we decided to be actually middle of the fairway. We are not trying to differentiate there. We calculate our emissions, we buy offsets. I think we do a great job, but we are aiming to be middle of the road, which I think in Canada is probably ahead of the curve.
It's very Canadian.
Because the way we compare ourselves is based off of our European peers.
Okay.
Because we have a big European business. And then on G, G's our job. We got to be, good on governance, and that's something that we take a lot of pride in.
Right. Let's talk about the synergies between Sagard and Power. Can you talk about that?
So look, we have been blessed by having amazing partners. And ultimately, if you think about our shareholder base today, Power is our largest shareholder. But we also now have Bank of Montreal as a shareholder, which we are really thrilled to have you. Thank you. We have Canada Life as shareholders, and then the management team of Sagard are major shareholders of the business. And what's been great, and then finally we have these new Abu Dhabi partners in a group called Lunette, which is a new asset manager in Abu Dhabi. These partners are hugely strategic for us because they basically seed our funds, they support our fundraisers, and ultimately are the fuel that allows us to kind of go faster. We then benefit from this entire ecosystem, right? Because in the Power ecosystem, there's about $2.7 trillion under administration and under many, many brands. And it's basically like walking into a living room where every drawer you pull has cash in it. And so, we basically navigate that ecosystem extremely well and have been very successful at raising money from that ecosystem and will continue to do so. And the reality is it's the same way with every financial institution. We thought we were going to succeed in one area with one of our partners, and then this entire other area ends up being one of our biggest partners. And so it's been an incredible ecosystem. They've been very generous with us in that they let us operate entirely independently. And that's been really important for our growth, is being able to leverage that ecosystem while being totally independent has been important. And then for our fintech portfolio, it's been transformative.
Yeah.
Like if you think of Nesto that now manages all the mortgages for IG and Canada Life. If you think of Conquest Planning, I saw Mark Evans earlier today, who does all the financial planning software for them, and they were early clients. It's been transformative to help our portfolio companies succeed, and we're going to keep this relationship very dynamic for the years to come.
No doubt. Also from the audience, private credit. Are we still going to see growth in private credit? What do you envision for that asset class?
We're going to see growth in private credit for a long time. Look, if you look at the failures of some of the U.S. banks recently, that's going to lead to more tighter regulations, which means continuously pushing out of certain lending types off the bank balance sheets. I think Basel III has some pretty major ramifications as well. And so, the moving a private credit off of banks and into they call it the shadow banking sector, I think is going to continue to happen. And honestly, is actually much better for society. Because if you think about when a bank lends, it's lending with huge amount of leverage. And so there's a lot of risk in that. When a private credit fund lends, it actually doesn't have the same level of leverage. So the risk of having a blow up in a private credit manager is much lower than having a big bank blow up. So ultimately, having these private funds, own that risk and diversify the risk is good. The other reason why it's much better is you have much better asset liability matching. Because if you think about a bank, it's taking short-term deposits and it's lending long-term.
Yep.
If you look at our business, we generally match the assets and the liabilities that we have, which ultimately reduces the risk as well. Because if you look at some of the bank failures, and if you look at failures in general in financial services, it has to do with liquidity.
One last question and then a little fun game we're going to play. So looking forward, what kind of legacy do you want to leave in terms of the business community, on behalf of your family? How do you envision that?
Yeah. So look, legacy number one, I have 4 children and a wife, and I want them to have every opportunity. Like, one of the things that haunts me is to make sure that my children have the same opportunities I had. And so I'd say legacy one is making sure that they benefit from the same opportunities I had. So, enforcing those values.
How old are they?
Is really important. 13, 12, 8, and 6.
And are they tapping the terracotta?
They are not tapping the terracotta yet, but my 2 eldest are already starting to think we want to build businesses this summer. And I was like, good, let's go. And so that's kind of legacy one. Legacy two is like, I want thousands of entrepreneurs to kind of look back at their careers and think the best thing that happened to us was meeting Sagard. Like, that would make me so happy, because if 1,000 entrepreneurs feel that meeting us was the best thing that ever happened to them, like, that will be millions of jobs and lots of wealth in our communities, and that would make me extremely happy. Like, one of the things that I get a lot of joy from is watching entrepreneurs build, and I know many of my partners have that same joy, and I think that as a team, if we could have maximum impact on the entrepreneurial community in this country and in every country where we operate, we'll be really, really happy.
Great. Before I move on to our next little thing, any more questions from the crowd? I know we've got the old style. Okay, then I want to do a lightning round with you. I don't want you to read these. So 1-word answers if you can.
Yeah.
Talking or texting?
Talking.
Nickname your parents called you?
You know what? My mom is very traditional, so they call me Paul. But, I've gotten some affinity to PD3, which seems to be very popular in Toronto.
And your parents actually call you that?
No.
No.
My dad was making fun of me last night, being like, someone called me and was like, hey, PD3 said this. And my dad was like, who's PD3?
Favorite book or book you're reading now?
So favorite book would be The Glass Palace by Amitav Ghosh. And book I'm reading now, like, I read multiple books at once.
Okay.
I read Dune recently. I really enjoyed that. I've just started reading science fiction, and I find that like a lot of fun. And so.
Okay. How many hours of sleep do you need?
7.
Nope. Who inspires you?
So many people. Like, in our industry, like, I have major man crushes on Bruce Flatt, John Gray, Dominique Sénéquier. Like, these are leaders that, literally everything they produce, I read. I'm like, looking at, John Gray's commencement speeches in high schools, because like every tidbit is a learning. And so, the leaders of our industry who've built these great firms really inspire me. Obviously, I'm very inspired by my mom and dad. My mother is the source of our work ethic and our entrepreneurial spirit. And my dad is very much the source of our humility, and I'd say our desire to have well-rounded lives, but I think we fail miserably at it. But lots of people inspire me.
Okay. Can you say one word in Arabic for us?
Let me think about that.
Yalla.
No, yeah, yalla, but there's one that's like, hey man, that I love. Anyways, I forget it, but no.
We'll go with yalla. Climb a mountain or jump from a plane?
Climb a mountain every day of the week. I'm terrified of heights.
How many cups of coffee do you drink a day?
10.
Oh. What's
Between 10 and 20. Okay. Notice that I have a lot of energy.
What is your middle name?
Guy.
Okay, I looked that up. I couldn't find it, so I had to ask you.
Guy.
In one word, what does Canada mean to you?
Hope.
Great. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And let me start just by saying on behalf of the club, Paul, thank you very much for coming to our cocktail table. We appreciate your insights, and I took away a number of takeaways. I won't list them all. One thing I'll do though, with my performance evaluation coming up, I'm going to commission a play. So I thank you for that. Thank you for that. But thank you for your commitment to entrepreneurs and your passion and your vision, and we wish you continued success and hope to have you back soon for an update. Tanya, thank you for leading such a wonderful discussion. It was enjoyable, it was fun. And thank you to our sponsors, PwC and Torys LLP, and to our AV supplier, as always, VVC Live. Thank you for facilitating today's event. 3 to mention before we close. May 9th, we're hosting a panel on Canada's economic resilience with opening remarks from Deputy Minister Simon Kennedy. And again, for 2 that might be very relevant to this group, May 23rd, we'll host our 2024 Private Equity Outlook with panelists from Hoop, Fengate, Brookfield, and Kensington Partners. I will let you know if Bruce comes, and we'll keep you posted. On May 30th, join us for a panel discussion on employer-sponsored healthcare, which I mentioned earlier, featuring several experts, including the CEO of Dialogue and the president of Sun Life Health. Visit our website at canadianclub.org for more information on any of these events. Thank you to everyone in the room online. Have a wonderful afternoon, and we'll see you again soon. Bye now.